My father and mother came from Germany in 1846 from the colony of Prince Solms and settled in Fredericksburg, Gillespie County, Texas. My father, Moritz Lehman, died in 1864. In 1866, my mother married Philip Buchmeyer. Some time after the end of the Civil War, they received a large tract of land near Squaw Creek, about 25 miles northwest of Fredericksburg. On this frontier land, they built their cabin and gradually engaged in farming and raising livestock. From the beginning of the Civil War until 1872, Indians occasionally raided Gillespie and neighboring counties, extending their depredations far southward, almost as far as Austin and even San Antonio. The soil of many valleys, outwardly peaceful, had been soaked with the blood of brave pioneers who tried to build homes for their families in the wilderness. The valleys of Beaver Creek and Squaw Creek, with their tributaries, seemed to invite the bold frontiersmen with their broad spaces, and 2 or 3 other German families had also settled near our ranch. Although the homes were several miles apart, they formed the nucleus of a small settlement. The soil in these valleys was very fertile, rich in water sources, with an excellent view in all directions, and there was plenty of game. Because of these natural advantages, and despite the Indian raids during which many of our horses were stolen and cattle maimed or killed, the settlers prospered. Today, their descendants rank among the most respected and prosperous residents of Mason and Gillespie counties.
One day in May 1870, my brother Willie Lehman and I, along with my 2 sisters, Caroline and Gusta, were sent to the wheat field to scare away the birds. Gusta was very small at the time, perhaps 2 years old, and was under Caroline's care. I was about 11. Willie had just turned 8, and Caroline was already nearly a young woman. We took our places for the task when we suddenly realized that we were surrounded by Indians. Seeing their terribly painted faces, we were seized with terror and tried to run home. Willie was caught where he sat. Caroline ran toward the house, leaving the little one behind. The Indians fired several shots at her, and she fell unconscious from fright. The Indians had no time to check what had happened to her and assumed she was dead. Later, they often told me she had been killed, and I believed it until, years later, I returned home. They chased me for a while before they caught me. I screamed and struggled with all my strength. Their chief, Carnaviste, grabbed me tightly, and then the real fight began. The Indian threw me violently, choked and beat me, tore off my clothes, threw aside my hat, which I had worn for over 8 years, and I thought for sure he would kill me. I dug my fingers into his long black hair and pulled with all the force I had. I kicked him in the stomach and bit him, and almost managed to break free when another Indian named Shivat ran up. Then Carnaviste seized my head, the other caught my legs, and they carried me to a nearby fence. Swinging me back and forth, they threw me over it so hard that I plowed face first into the sand and gravel. I was completely stunned and unable to rise until they jumped over the fence and came up to me. Soon I was stripped naked and securely tied to the back of a wild, unbroken horse. The Indians wasted no time and galloped away at full speed.
As we rode through brush and thickets, my flesh was torn and scratched by mesquite thorns and cacti, and the blazing sun covered my bare back and limbs with blisters. Death would probably have been a relief at that moment. My brother Willie was in the same pitiful condition as I, but he did not complain. The Indians rode along Loyal Valley and headed toward the Moseley Mountains, where they had left some of their horses in a ravine. All of them except Carnavaste, who stayed behind to guard us, went after the horses. When they disappeared from sight, we heard several gunshots. Carnavaste climbed a rise to see who was shooting, and Willie and I tried to escape. But my brother could not run fast, and soon Carnavaste caught us, beat us, and stuffed rags into our mouths so we could not cry out. Then, with gestures, he made it clear that if we tried to run again, he would torture us. Before long, the Indians returned with stolen horses, and we headed west. On the way, they seized 2 more horses, a gray and a bay. One bore the brand of William Kidd, the other belonged to Mr. Stone. Then we turned northwest, passed by Kaiser's ranch, and went toward the Llano River. On the bank, they took us off the horses, bound my hands and feet, and tied only Willie's legs. Then everyone lay down to rest. They built no fire and ate nothing. We brothers had eaten breakfast that morning. In the middle of the night, they woke us, and we moved up Willow Creek, turned right from Mason, and then the party divided. Willie was sent with one group, and I with another. The Indians left scouts behind to see whether we were being pursued and to cover our trail if necessary.
I went with Carnivist. We came across a very young calf lying down. Carnivist motioned for me to catch it, crawling toward it like a dog. I was afraid to disobey, so I approached the little creature from behind and caught it. Carnivist leaped from his horse, cut its throat, plunged his knife into its belly, drew out the curdled milk from its stomach, and began to eat it, smacking his lips with satisfaction. The sight made me sick. He grabbed me, forced my head into the calf's abdomen, and rubbed me in the foul contents until my face, eyes, nose, and ears were smeared and it filled my throat. He pinched my nose shut, forcing me to swallow, but my stomach rejected it and I vomited violently. Then he cut out the kidneys and liver and made me bite into them while they were still warm with the animal's life. I vomited again, and he gathered the mess from the ground and forced it back into my mouth. When I retched once more, he mixed my vomit with warm blood and pushed it down my throat again. The blood, oddly enough, my stomach kept down. Then Carnivist took me to a spring, washed my face, seated me beside him on the horse, and we rejoined the other Indians of our party.
After riding for some distance, we climbed a hill and built a large fire. Soon we saw 6 Indians approaching, driving a big herd of stolen horses. They rode slowly up the hill, and when they recognized us, they boldly joined us. Then we all sat down to devour the skinned and roasted calf. After that, the 6 Indians who had been with Willie rode farther north. We destroyed all possible traces of our camp, waited for the scouts to return, and set off in the same direction. Our route abounded with springs, but we were not allowed to drink, though I suffered greatly from thirst. We divided again, and Carnoviste continued to watch over me. He unloaded his pistol and handed it to me to see whether I could handle it. For a while, we amused ourselves, and I even began to think that the old devil might be a pleasant and cheerful companion, though I scarcely understood him, when suddenly he took and beat me for no reason. Without warning, both groups reunited again, making a total of 12 Indians. After a brief consultation, they once more divided into 2 parties. 6 went west, and I was among them. The other 6 went north, taking Willie with them. That same day, our party stole 9 fine horses. Then we joined together again and rode to a muddy pond full of insects and smelling strongly of slime and frogs. There they all dismounted. The Indians gathered a quantity of clean grass and spread it over the water's surface, using it as a kind of sieve.
I moved a little apart from them, fell to the ground near the pond, and began sucking the dirty water through the layer of grass and debris, enjoying the cool, refreshing touch of the breeze that moistened my palate as I drifted into thoughts of home. But the old Carniviste came up behind me, shoved my head down into the mire, and all the red rascals burst out laughing at me. From that pool we went northward, and around 4 in the afternoon we killed a young steer and lit a fire on a hill. The Indians chose the wood very carefully, for if the smoke rose too high, it might betray our presence to white settlers. Carniviste tethered his horse to a stake, took me by the hand, and we walked some distance back along the trail. He had a kind of mirror, a bright piece of steel. Other Indians had similar ones.
which he used to flash sunlight in a certain sequence. These signals were meant for someone behind us on the trail, and soon an answering flash told him that all was well. Carnathy stayed gestured for me to go back, but I did not understand what he wanted. I walked a short way, then turned back, but he repeated the gesture and growled something. I went again and turned back once more. Now he grew furious, pulled out his pistol and thrust it toward me, but I still did not comprehend his meaning. Then he lowered the weapon and turned toward his horse. At last, I realized he wanted me to bring him his horse. When I did so, he seated me on it, mounted in front of me, and we rode to the rest of the Indians who were already encamped beside a small stream. Willie was there. They washed and dressed our wounds, then painted us like Indians and placed us on horses prepared for a long journey. The Indian saddles, made from forked sticks, were uncomfortable enough under any circumstances, but since we were naked, they were pure torture. The reader may imagine the sufferings of a child who, only a day or two before, had been tenderly cared for by his father and caressed by a devoted mother, and who now was stripped of all hope of rescue, not knowing at what moment his life might end. His face blistered by the scorching sun, the skin on his back and chest peeling, his legs and arms bound, and his raw flesh chafed to the bone by the rough wooden saddle. Could the torments of Job have been more unbearable? Guiding their horses, we rode northwest. On the 5th day after our capture near Lipan Creek, we stumbled upon a group of rangers. Some were watering their horses in a small pond, while others were setting up camp. They hadn't seen us, and the Indians quickly turned back, galloping at full speed along the same trail we had come, abandoning the herd of horses. One Indian, whose leg was injured, could only move at a walk. To keep up, he jumped onto the horse that Willie was riding. The horse showed signs of agitation, and the Indian, irritated, threw Willie into a clump of brush and spurred away after the others. He rode his horse hard for some distance before the poor animal collapsed from exhaustion. Another Indian rode back, took him up behind, and the two continued their flight together. When Willie realized he had been left behind, he got to his feet and wandered about until he found a well-used road. He followed it for a mile or two before meeting a man on horseback. The man spoke with him briefly, then rode away, leaving the little boy standing where he was. A bit farther along, Willie met a freighter driving a wagon loaded for Fort McCavitt. The man gave him a ride as far as Kickapoo Springs, where there was a stage station, and left him there with a promise to return. Not long after, a stagecoach passed through Kickapoo Springs on its way from Fort Concho to Fredericksburg and San Antonio. The driver offered to take Willie home, but the boy told him he would wait. A day or two later, the freighter returned, picked Willie up, and took him home to our nearly frantic mother. He had been gone almost 9 days. His return filled our family with indescribable joy, for they had begun to believe they would never see either of us again. When Willie met the man on horseback near Kickapoo, he must have been a strange sight, painted like an Indian, wearing on his head a cap made from the scalp of the young calf that the Indians had placed there, and shy by nature. He couldn't make himself understood. After the man rode away, Willie stepped off the road, and when he saw the freight wagon approaching, he gathered his courage, threw away the calfskin cap, and called out to the driver. They quickly understood one another. Meanwhile, after galloping many miles with me tied before them, the Indians finally halted to hold council. Since the horse and herd was lost, they decided to turn back toward the settlements and steal more horses. Returning to their tribe empty-handed would have been disgraceful. 10 of them rode back, while 2, Chivat and Pinheiro, agreed to take me northwest toward the Indian encampment. I was still tied to the horse, and the riding was torture. Yet through all of it, I could think only of my younger brother. I didn't know what had become of him, and feared the Indians had killed him. I wept bitterly. The loneliness and uncertainty were almost unbearable. Something in me still whispered that he had escaped, but how could an 8-year-old boy ever survive in that vast, wild wilderness? I also thought of home. our dear home and of my beloved mother and sisters, those sorrowful thoughts filled my mind through every weary mile of our journey, and I was heartsick and desolate. We rode around Fort Concho and then traveled for 3 days without sleep, food, or water. Almost at dawn on the 3rd day, by that time Chavat had untied me, we reached a small stream and stopped a little above it. I slipped away and crawled down toward the water on my right. I was so parched that all I desired was to feel the touch of water. I drank and bathed for a short while. Soon the 2 Indians discovered my absence and began searching for me, but it never occurred to them to look near the water. At last they gave up and rode on. By then I had quenched my thirst and began to think what to do next. I knew I could not reach home on my own. Wolves, wildcats, and other beasts would surely tear me apart before I made it far. If I went after the Indians, I thought, perhaps seeing that I did not wish to escape, they might treat me better. So I reasoned. Soon they turned and, spotting me, stopped to wait. When I came up, Pinheiro grabbed me by the hair, pulled me onto his horse, and we rode all day, nearly 9 hours, before making camp. The Indians usually chose a high place for their camps, where there would be enough water for drinking and bathing. I watched as they made fire. Chavat took 2 sticks and rubbed them together until they began to smoke. He had cut small notches into them and sprinkled sand in the grooves to create friction. Once the fire was started, the red men lit their cigarettes and kept the flame steady, not too weak, not too strong.
Then they seized me, tied a rope around my neck, and fastened the other end to a bush. They bound my hands in front of me with a strap and tied my feet together. After that, they took 2 poles and placed them across forked sticks driven into the ground, 6 feet apart. They tied my hands to one pole and my feet to the other, suspending me face down so that my chest nearly touched the sand. If I tried to move, the cords cut deep into my flesh. Not satisfied with this tormenting position, the red devils placed a heavy stone on my back, pressing my face and nose into the sand. I lay that way all night, uncovered except for the great stone that pinned me down. The pain was excruciating, and whenever I groaned, one of them would spring up, yank my ears and hair, and strike me. How I lived through that dreadful night I cannot say. At dawn, Pinheiro removed the stone, untied me, and leveled his rifle at my chest. Chavat strung his bow and set an arrow to it, then motioned for me to stand. I no longer cared whether they killed me or not. I was ready to die. But after several attempts, I managed to rise. I was so sore and weak that I could barely stand upright. My skin was covered with sores, and the slightest movement opened them, so that pus and blood ran down my body. They placed me on a horse, and without breakfast we rode on. This was now the 4th day without food. The water I had drunk earlier had only worsened my feverish state, and my throat was so dry that I could not even spit.
We entered the Llano Estacado, a wide open country, though not entirely barren. After 3 or 4 hours of riding, Pinheiro suddenly stopped and pointed to the grass below. I saw something with small, shining eyes. He motioned for me to get down and catch it, but I was afraid, not knowing what it was. Then he dismounted and caught it himself. It was 2 little antelopes. We took them along, and after riding some distance more, we stopped, built a large fire, stuck 2 poles into the ground, and roasted the antelopes whole, alive with hair, entrails, and all. We were starving and had no time for skinning or refinement. It was the first food we had eaten in 4 days, and we devoured the hair and sharp bones of those beautiful little creatures like wild beasts. Antelopes have a curious nature. There's something between a goat and a deer, and often leave their young hidden in the grass for a long time. If something happens to the fawn, the mother's curiosity will lead her to return and see what became of it.
So before long, we saw 2 adults following our trail, and that night they became our supper. We camped at dusk, but they did not treat me as cruelly as before. They merely tied me up and placed no further burden upon me. After finishing the antelopes, we again rode for 2 days without food. One day, we saw at a distance a large, shaggy animal, which I was sure weighed a full ton. It looked heavy and clumsy, yet surprisingly swift. When both Indians galloped toward it, the creature covered a good stretch of ground at remarkable speed. It was the first buffalo I had ever seen, though I remembered my father once describing one to me. The animal was powerfully built, with slightly curved horns and a great hump on its neck. Soon, Chivat and Pinheiro killed it, slid open its belly, and began devouring what they found inside its stomach and around it. Then they cut off a piece of liver, smeared it with bile, and offered it to me to eat. I tried to swallow it, but it came back up. The Indians dipped the piece again in bile, and only then was I able to force it down. From that moment, we had an abundance of meat, and I learned to eat whatever they gave me without vomiting. We traveled for at least 10 more days, until one day we rode up a small hill. Chivat lifted a red blanket, waved it in a semicircle, and then waved it back again in the opposite direction. He repeated this several times. I watched their faces. At first, they seemed puzzled, but soon their expressions brightened, and their grimaces turned into broad grins. They seemed to forget me completely. Suddenly, wild cries burst from their throats, and they spurred their horses into full gallop. Before long, we rode into an Indian village spread along the shining surface of a lake, somewhere near the border of New Mexico. Shouts, yells, and all manner of sounds filled our ears as the Indians ran out to meet us. The village contained, I think, about 2,500 people. Chivat dismounted and handed me his horse's reins, while Pinheiro led my horse toward the lodge of Carnoviste and stopped there. The squaws and children screamed, ululated, and made such confusion that I could not understand anything and was terribly frightened. Some of them rushed towards me, and I thought my last hour had come. A fat, stocky, heathen old woman, looking as though she had just stepped out of hell, grabbed me, dragged me off the horse, pinched, struck, and beat me, rolling me in the dust while the others looked on in wild delight. At last, the old hag allowed me to rise. The entire camp whirled around me, dancing and yelling. The older squaws stood in the inner circle, the braves formed the second row, and the young girls and boys made up the outer ring. The women sang their magic chants. The warriors fired their rifles into the air and howled. It was a great celebration for them. Suddenly, the uproar ceased when an old dandy with a large knife came toward me and seized my hair. I thought he meant to scalp me, but instead he began cutting my hair short. The blade grazed my scalp more than once, and blood trickled down my back, my face, and over my shoulders. I tried to keep my face expressionless and hide my fear. Then another barbarian heated a small awl, came up to me, and drove the glowing point through my ear to make a hole. Others held me while he worked. He pulled out the awl and inserted a thin strip of deerskin. He did the same with my other ear. When I thought the ordeal was over, he decided to continue my torment and pressed a heated iron rod against my hands, burning large holes through them. I still bear the scars to this day and can show them as proof of my words. I fought and kicked, nearly delirious with pain, but they held me tight and burned me until I could no longer endure it and began to lose consciousness. I longed for death. I was weak, pale, and fainting. When night fell, everyone left me lying there, half dead. How long I remained in that state, I do not know. But after the Apaches had punished me to satisfy their savage whims, they lifted me up and poured water over me until I began to stir and show signs of life again.